it will be the last presentation. We're going to take 15 minutes from the lunch break. It will be at 12:30. Sorry about that, but it will still leave you 45 minutes for lunch, and we'll manage it as well as we can. Thank you very much. So, please, without further ado, Malik.
Okay. Hello. Good morning. This one. Thank you, IDRC, for this opportunity to share our work at this forum. And it would be great to have feedback from all of you here. This work is an impact evaluation that we've been doing for some years of a government skills training program for women. We have presented this work at other conferences, but this is the first time we are presenting it at a gender-focused forum, so great to have feedback from all of you here. In this project, we are not only interested in a randomized evaluation of the skills training program and its impact on women's socioeconomic outcomes as one of the goals, but we are also interested in understanding why women often do not take advantage of such opportunities. And so this has been mentioned in this conference also, that we all know that distance from the service facility really tends to reduce the uptake and women's participation. So as part of this impact evaluation of the skills training program, we also embedded some interventions trying to understand why distance is such a constraint and what can the service providers do about it. How can it be mitigated to improve participation? So it's a collaborative project, like some of the other projects presented here. It's a collaboration between local and international researchers. Four of us, myself, I'm Farooq Naseer, Ali Chima, Jacob Shapiro, and Asim Khwaja, we are involved with the impact evaluation of this project. And our colleagues, Rabia and Faiza, are the qualitative experts asking some of these same questions. Okay, let me skip this. So, a lot of services need to be accessed in person, right? And so we want to know what is it about distance that makes it such a binding constraint for women's ability to participate and benefit from services that are designed for them, that they need and they want to get, and yet are unable to benefit from. And obviously the question is more important if you are working in a socially conservative environment. So the constraints may be more or less depending on the context. Even though we study this question in the context of a vocational skills training program, obviously the problem, the distance constraint is more general. It applies to accessing education, services, health, or employment. Okay, so we were supposed to put a slide on the method. So we are using a sequential mixed method design. So our randomized evaluation, so there's a quant qual followed by a randomized experiment and a qualitative ex post qualitative study. The initial quantitative work that we did was extremely important in understanding the context, whether women want skills training, what sort of vocational skill they are interested in. And then we also did a couple of small pilot experiments. Because we are working with a government program that is rolling these training schemes out, we embedded some evaluations into those schemes, which were extremely useful in not just informing us about the constraints, but also informing the design. Both that quant and the follow-up qualitative work was extremely useful in identifying and informing the design of our evaluation. Okay, so what I want to say about the context is that it's a low-income area with a very high demand for skills training, which is great news for us. Over 90% of households nominated someone in the baseline survey for skills training. 70% of the women wanted the tailoring skills, the course that we are offering and evaluating. So there's very high demand. We are working, as I said, with a government set body which is tasked to provide skills training to both men and women. This is the geographical location of our study site. Within Pakistan, we are working in 4 districts in South Punjab with a population of 10 million. And our job, as I said, as academics and researchers is to evaluate this program, both on whether it can improve access and also does it have an impact. Okay, so just to recap, we are working in a low-income area. There's very high demand for skills training. Women in particular want the tailoring skill, a large majority of them, and there were multiple ways in which we elicited that demand through our survey, and we wanted to be very careful that we are not getting just a cheap talk response. So we were all very happy some years back, around 2012, that the demand is high, let's roll out the program and evaluate it. Using encouragement design for those of you who are from the RCT background. So let's go out, give vouchers. Women and men would enroll in these training programs, and let's see, compare them with the control group, see what difference skills training makes. So we did that, and that's when our Titanic hit the proverbial iceberg. So this diagram actually tells you, so when we gave out vouchers to women, we also recorded their choice. So first we went in to our sample households. We said, here's the government program that's starting. These are the training opportunities. These are the education requirements for these different courses. This is where the training center is located, blah, blah. We will come back in a week, and why don't you think about it, whether you want, there's some course that you would like to take here. And when we come back, we would like to know which course you want to take and who in your household wants to attend this training. We will note that down, and then we'll issue you a voucher in the name of that person. Right? And that voucher you can take to the training center, and you will get enrollment on a priority basis. Right? So the first step for the household was to look at the training options and select a training and select who in the household would go and attend that training. So of the 464 women who were offered, or the households who were offered these training options, we saw 44% selected a course. So that's okay. It's not 70% of what our baseline survey was indicating, but we didn't expect everyone who said in the survey they wanted a course to actually enroll in a course. But what happened later on, remember the next step is to actually go and, so we give you a voucher, you go and submit that voucher and get enrolled in the course. We see a further 84% decline beyond that point. So now you have selected a course, you have nominated someone, and yet when the course starts, when it comes time to submit that voucher and to actually start training, we see a huge drop again. So out of the 464, only 33 women enrolled. That's 7%. Compare that to 70% in the survey. And of those 33, 16 actually stayed the duration. So mostly these were 3-month to 6-month training courses. Only 16 or 3% actually completed training. So it was very clear from this and the follow-up work that we did that for women, distance was a big constraint, a big reason why we saw this dropout. So clearly there's some constraint. So they want to get these training, these skills training, but there's some constraint which is preventing them from doing that. So then based on follow-up work which involved some pilot experiments where when we moved the training center in the village, we saw the uptake went up from 3% to 30%. So opening the center in the village really improved enrollment by 10 times, right? So that was clearly having an effect, and that was a randomized evaluation. So based on that and based on interviews with women trying to understand what is it about distance which makes it such a binding constraint again. Is it the cost of travel? Is it the information? Is it hard to get information if the center is located at a distance away from your house? Is it hard to convince other people in your household and other people in the community that this is a very useful, valuable opportunity for me and I want to get this training if the center is not in your village? Is it lack of good transport options in the area where you live? You can't go outside your village. And in all these conversations, it was clear that there is some social aspect to it also. So it's not an individual utility maximization model where the private value and my resources and constraints determine my choice. So in addition, so since we were interested in what actually overcomes or solves the distance constraint, we were also interested in one intervention where, because the simplest policy instrument that the government has is to give more money and to let people solve whatever problem they are facing. So if this is childcare, maybe you can use that money to arrange childcare. If it's lack of transport, maybe you can use it to spend. So there's variation in the stipend amount. So let me just skip. I'm running back behind on the time. So this is the design of our randomized evaluation. These are just meant to show that the randomization worked, balance checks. So in terms of the findings, in the graph here, what we have plotted, so there are 4 points and there are 4 lines. So again, we are trying to understand at each stage of decision making, from accepting a voucher to submitting a voucher to actually showing up at the training course and then completing it. How does distance play a role in each of these stages? We can see that all of these lines indicate, so the x-axis is the distance to the nearest center from your village. Obviously, if the center is located in your village, that distance is 0. This graph is measuring distance at the village level. So we can see that distance does have a impact on enrollment, a negative impact. But what's interesting is that in addition to the distance impact, we are also finding in this graph boundary impact. So if you look at this end of the graph, even the closest, if I open the center not in your village but in the neighboring village, so the center is really close, that does not increase participation to the extent that opening it in your village does, right? So in addition to the distance impact, the negative impact of distance on participation, there's also apparently a boundary effect. So if you have to cross the boundary of your village, that really dampens your participation. Okay, so obviously in the previous graph, we are taking distance to the center within village as 0. We are measuring distance at the village level, and we were doing that using geo-coordinates on which we had partial data, so we couldn't do individual distances. But distance within village is not 0. So villages are spread out. So this is a map of one village, and there are multiple settlements. So So then when we measure distance more accurately, we still find the same result that within village is much better than outside of village. So let me just say one thing about this graph. So the red line is all the center, all the women who have to go outside of their village to enroll in the training program. And the blue line is all the women who have to participate within their village. The center is located in your village. So both are downward sloping. Distance reduces uptake regardless of whether the center is within or outside, but the blue line is consistently above the red one. So I'm going to skip that slide. So what actually solves distance? So in a group of villages where we didn't open the center, we gave people the option, the community the option to organize a dedicated transport, group transport. And that seems to have a big impact. Our social interventions didn't have an impact, so that's an interesting part also. So in the communities where we organized meetings at the community level, invited influentials and men in the community, held a separate meeting with them, there it had no impact. Holding those sessions didn't improve women's participation. So group transport has an impact, and giving more stipend obviously has an impact. And this slide is showing that the skill itself, obviously, if you are so constrained by distance by going out of your village, there's a question whether you can actually, even if you get skills training, would you be able to go to the market or seek employment or sell your products? So there is a positive impact overall in the program. It's higher in the subset where we followed up with a market linkage intervention. So I am doing very bad on time, so I'll hand over to Farooq.
So the qualitative work that we undertook is happening after the first two phases, or the first two interventions that were undertaken by Farooq and Asim and other colleagues. And the main sort of objective of this work was to try and understand what impact, now that women have been part of the training exercises and part of interventions that have tried to reduce the distance between them and accessing the market, how have these interventions impacted their lives? What do they have to say about it? And how are they viewing themselves now, or differences? How are they perceiving differences in their skills and also the opportunities that they now have? So that was one of the objectives, and the other objectives was to also try and engage with some of the counterintuitive patterns that were emerging after the interventions had been undertaken. So essentially we're defining impact in terms of economic and social empowerment, but we wanted to look at empowerment as a process. So we found Naila Kabir's framework very useful, where she talks about empowerment as a process of building capacities, but also evidence that you can find of successful exercise of agency. We didn't have any preconceived notions really about what kinds of agency we'll see. It was fantastic to hear the presentation in the morning, because we very much had the same experience. We started with sort of the DHS way of asking questions about who's making decisions, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later on. But we very quickly realized that all decisions and sort of the evidence and various things had to be broken down into very context-specific examples, and you had to elicit examples from them. So one of the sort of the warm-up questions we had in the interviews when we sat down with these women was to ask them to talk about themselves. And invariably, across sort of education levels, across sort of whether they continued or didn't continue with the training, how their experience was, the answer we used to get, what do you want me to talk about? What is it that, you know? So usually you wouldn't necessarily, we were asking them questions to try and reveal as much about their lives as possible, but it was important not to ask incredibly broad questions, but to give them them and ask them incredibly sort of specific things. So the design of the qualitative study is such that we're speaking to about 100 women, and we're speaking to, because there were different intervention arms, we're speaking to women who were part of the controls, we were speaking to women who were part of the interventions. But the other thing that became very clear from the baseline surveys that the quantitative team had done was that there was attrition, which Farooq spoke about. So there were women who expressed willingness to be part of programs and then who didn't join. Those who joined but then didn't complete the training. So another thing we were interested in was speaking to women from all these different categories to find out what happened. What was easier? What was it about the lives of women that allowed them to successfully remain part of interventions till the end? And what happened with the women who had to drop out? So the emerging, one thing I should mention is that these are very much preliminary findings, and they're preliminary for two reasons. One, because the qualitative work is still underway, and two, even so now we have the results from about 40, so we have conducted about 40 to 50 interviews, and we have half of them to go. So the results that the findings that I'm talking about today are from the training intervention, where you had training centers either based in villages, their own villages, or where they were provided transport to get to the training center if it was outside the village. And essentially what I want to talk about a little bit is what the emerging themes are for us, what the women talk to us about. So one of the things when you ask them about what this training, what impact this training has had, they speak about 2 or 3 different things. So one, in terms of how their skills have actually improved. So this is very much this direct outcome of having been part of a training program that was on stitching skills. But also in terms of the capacities, either that this training has built or has not built, what we expected the training to have done for these women and whether that actually happened or not. And in terms of capacity, we're talking about the capacity to generate income for themselves or the capacity to save more. Then we also wanted to deconstruct the notion of what improvement in stitching skills means. As I go forward, but a lot of the women in Pakistan already know how to sew. So what was it that this training did for them, and how did that make a difference? But the other emerging theme from our conversations with these women is also that some of the constraints are persistent, and they persist across. So you can bring the center as close to them as possible. You can provide transport to them. You can give them the skills to be able to earn income. But there's something about the social sort of structures that will depress women's participation in economic activities, and I think so in terms of sort of improvements in skills, as I said, a lot of women knew how to sew, but one of the biggest impacts that these of the training on these women's lives was them being able to sew in a way, and they express this themselves, that a tailor is able to do it. So before, they used to use their hands and fingers, for example, to measure cloth. They weren't very precise with how they were stitching clothes, and if they were doing this for other people, then they'd have to sort of people would keep coming back to them for alterations. They were not happy. This was quite a problem given all the other work that they had to do. So they simply used to give up and not participate or not to sew commercially. Now they felt a lot more confident about the fact that they had learned skills, they had learned about designs, they had learned to do things, or make frocks for children, or simple, basic, specific things that they weren't able to do before. Another thing that they told us that the training was able to do was to get them to recognize numbers. So a lot of these women, as Farooq mentioned, are from low-income communities. Many of them had not been to school. They didn't have basic literacy or numeracy skills. So, and part of the intervention was to give them those sort of functional literacy skills as well. And that made a huge difference in terms of also just how they were able to use the skill that they were learning. So just the use of the measuring tape is emerging as a significant example for us, because it makes the difference in the quality of the product that the women are able to produce. There's some evidence emerging also in terms of how they want to use what they've learned. So a lot of women speak to us about how instead of they want to open a training center, so they want to train other women in the village to be able to do the same thing that they're doing, but resources might be an issue for doing that. So if our assumption of the benefit to these women was that they're going to generate income from commercial activity, one of the things that we were faced with was that's not necessarily how they're seeing the benefit of the training. They're very happy to be self-reliant. They're very happy to be stitching clothes for their own family, because now they don't have to spend as much on paying someone else to do the same for them. In terms of sort of persistent constraints, and perhaps this can come again, one of the things that we're trying to do through the qualitative work is really unpack what the boundary constraint means. So when we ask them about where they can go, how far they can go without permission, whether they'd be able to travel for work or training, one of the sort of the most interesting things we find is that the nature of distance is different for different activities, and I think this came up in the morning as well. So if it's about going to the fields to cut crops, to help your family, it can be much, much further, many more kilometers than where the training center is, and it's fine and it's acceptable. But when it's about the training center, then suddenly that distance, even if it's less, means something different, and permissions around it are going to work differently. We're still trying to speak to them, and one of the things we also want to do when we are trying to get the women to articulate what sort of the social constraints around working for income, but also traveling for work, was that we needed to speak to the men in the communities as well. So one of the things that we're going to do is also perhaps have focus groups with the men, and it'd be fantastic to get your feedback on some of these findings, and perhaps some of the other questions can come up during this. Thank you.
So, since this is kind of the sequential phase which it followed, and it's followed the mixed methods, I think that's good that they are getting results in a phase, and eventually going to next phase, redesigning that part. On the other hand, I mean, I'm not sure how much, because all the research have the time bound. So, and if we get the results, it has to be mainstreamed by the policymakers. So the one way, my question is, how long the government of Punjab is going to wait for getting the final results, because they are getting funding from others, and they have to show the results, and they have to replicate. So these are my questions, whether you have thought about it. The other thing is, you already mentioned about the collective level and individualistic attitude of women. I mean, I'm not sure whether when you start this study, whether that has been set as target, where we are going to focus, whether we are going to focus as collective level or individual level. Because even the empowerment is going to happen at individual level, I think that's not bad. But then you also have to work more on the collective level. For men, we also identified many constraints, but we only focus on the distance, and now we can see that it's not only the distance, but there are other constraints too. So whether we have thought of, because you already, it's not that you already identified it now, it was identified before you designing your second phase. So I think when you are redesigning that part, maybe in the next phase, or you are on the way, you can think of developing the next phase of RCT, having all those constraints within it, so that you can get the results. Because now you can see the distance is not the only one constraint you are working on. The other one, we also heard that the social mobilization, it didn't have any of impact because it was on the top of the two interventions, right? So on that way, I think you can also thought of, because the community identified some of the transports for the women to go to the training center. Whether if there are other constraints like maybe the child care or the household work, whether that can be identified by the community as the problem and whether they can manage those, or whether they can have some ways or means how can be managed at home. And because they already identified the transport, so it seems that they care, or what is in their mindsets. We have to know that, and then knowing that part, that can be part of the intervention, so that we can work on that. The stereotype gender attitudes of men and also women, because you were talking about the distance, and when it's related to the productivity, what they usually do, like working in the field, it doesn't matter, but it is also the productivity, learning the stitching and learning the marketing skills and some kind of thing. But they are not thinking that in that way, because you can't see it right now. So in that way, I think we have to change their mindset, and probably the model you are following for your social mobilization needs to be revisit and see what kind of model is going to work for that. And then you can also have, different models for, you have four pieces, you can see what model is going to work. That you can see, I think. And the other thing is, I think it's good to know that because their community is working on preparing some kind of transport, so it's good to know that they are getting support from the families. But as family, it's from the community. As individual family, what type of support the women are getting, we really don't know. We know that there are constraints, but we really don't know what are the supports they are already getting. So probably qualitative can explore more on that. And for the women, I also want to learn more about their motivation. For the women who are ultimately completing all the courses and going to the market, or proceeding in their life, I also want to know what's their motivation to continue that work, or what's the support.
Grimard. So that was actually a very interesting presentation and slides. The first thought that came to my mind when I saw this is that this is unlike Star Trek, where space is the final frontier. Here it's distance is the final frontier, but not quite that. So this is very interesting, very ambitious type of work, impressive work. We all know placement of programs is endogenous. A series of old papers in this way. Trying to determine this, which means OLS reduced form, putting programs on the right-hand side. It's going to be correlated with a bunch of things. Right? So that's why it's impressive to actually be in Pakistan, convince the government of Punjab to actually do something, and they do it. Actually do a randomized experiment, putting programs in some villages. That's an impressive thing to do. So that's great for that. And what's the advantage of this is, in fact, freer of the problems and then try to measure. So that's why for impact evaluation, of course, sorry, I feel like Jim Heckman. This is very interesting. You see this and you're maybe showing this to politicians. course, then bring so you can think of one looking at the impact of distance, the other space training. See that and the effect that training is important. So you're able to try to get that. So that's for that is impressive. It's trying to show, and there's some interesting learning one can be done in trying to get and the advantage. So in terms of the benefits, however, this is why it's interesting to have both of them. Look at this is a stitching mechanism. There, as you see that household consumption and maybe on individual income, the effect is training's done. Eventually, it has a cost benefit. You have to be careful of benefit because if this says for of consumption and then income, how much of this, and trying to, that's going to be interesting because of course, putting
So my question links to all of this. When you talk about the benefits, and again the non-monetary management, I was very struck, like the first thing that they wanted to do was, I want to set up my own training. And that might just be demonstration effect, because that's what they've seen. And I think coming back to or unpacking the value of this, and this is very much out in the future, it's not something that in this next year you'd be able to do, but just in thinking of when PSTF thinks about their products, a lot of that benefit could be what women see as options. So the first thing they see is this training program, and they're like, that could work for me. And there might be other aspects of that. The actual training itself, definitely, I do think there might be other things that we want to test, but I'd be interested in seeing what that is.
Move to child marriage in Bangladesh and labor force participation.
I don't have my glasses. Okay, so we had a slightly funny order in that you heard about our measurement before you heard about the experiment.
And it's also quite a complicated, because we're doing a long-term follow-up to an RCT that we did a while ago. So the original randomized trial in southwestern Bangladesh, the objective was to reduce child marriage, increase education, and empowerment of adolescent girls. So the target demographic was girls aged 10 to 17, and we tested an empowerment curricula in safe spaces. So this went through reproductive health, negotiating skills, there were sort of homework sessions where girls tried to keep their grades up and help each other out. Some were given literacy skills. And the second group had a conditional non-cash transfer, so their families got cooking oil if they had unmarried girls in. So, you know, if you married the girl off, then you lost the cooking oil. So, and then the third group had both the empowerment sessions and training and the cooking oil. So the result, and I'll show this to you more explicitly, but was that the non-cash transfer led to a delay in marriage and pregnancy. We had little immediate impact from the empowerment program, although it's the group that had both. So just getting the oil, just getting the non-cash transfer, delayed marriage and pregnancy. It did nothing on our measures of empowerment. The getting the incentive and empowerment definitely delayed marriage and pregnancy again. It was kind of borderline about whether it increased empowerment. So we haven't published that paper because we are going back now to measure empowerment more thoroughly. So these are the formal results to see, and from this first round, you see that child marriage under the incentive program, this at the top is the age at which they started when we did the baseline, and you see a fall of 9 percentage points in child marriage of those who started off at 14 to 16. In 14-year-olds who got the full 2 years of incentive, you see 10 percentage point reduction in child marriage. And again, you see those reductions even for girls who are really young. You can see here the control mean. So you've got, 22% are marrying before the age of 16, and that goes down by 5 percentage points. So that's how to read the table. We also see a reduction in teenage childbearing. And this is more recent data that we've collected. We also looked recently at the last class passed. I would note that we have a problem that we still have women who are still in education at ages 24, 25. So this isn't the last word on this, and this you might have censoring bias. We see basically there's different ways to look at the education, but we see small effects on education this round, or some evidence of some effects on education. It's a little less consistent. What we're doing now, what GrOW has funded us to do, is go back and say, okay, so there was a reduction in child marriage. What's the effect on economic empowerment of being married as an adult rather than being married as a child? And at the moment, we've done this census of all parents. So we go back to the 460 villages in our study and ask every parent of every adolescent girl these basic questions about child marriage. But what we're really interested in for the economic empowerment is the detailed follow-up that we're doing with a random sample of about 20 girls per village. And we're only about a third of the way through collecting that data, so I don't have any results for you. I'm not going to try and divide it by treatment and control because we don't have enough data to compare treatment and control, so I'm just going to give you descriptive evidence about what we're finding, so from the third of the data that we've already got. So what are these women doing? So one thing I thought was quite interesting was looking at the girls currently performing income-generating activity by age. So it sort of goes up a bit. over the ages, so this is all at end-line age. We see, most women, 71% of women don't do any economic generating activity, but of those that do, most of them have one activity, but still 5 percentage points do two income. What are they doing? Most of them are in the informal sector and doing and businesses here is if you're an employee outside the formal sector. The formal sector is factory work. So some of these girls are still they're not girls anymore. The women, they're still. This is mainly the industry mill factory. That's mainly the garment workers. So they're moving to Dhaka to do that, and livestock and agriculture is still part of what they're doing. No. This is out of the total. So if you sum them up, they will add up to all the women doing. So 12% of all women are doing informal work, or working in the informal sector, right? So it's not out of the women who are working, it's out of total women. Yeah? You'll see the reason for doing that later. This is the reasons that people give for starting income generating, and I think this is getting to what people have been talking about over the last couple of days, which some women are pushed into working, but they don't really want to, but they have to because of family circumstances. But we get a lot of people who are doing it because they want the money and to have more ability, income of their own that they can spend themselves. That was actually quite a surprisingly high result. This is the different occupations by age, and then the number of hours people are working in income-generating activity. Again, 71% not working in income-generating activity, and the sort of hours. So very few people are working 50 hours a week. Now, yes. Yeah. And here we also ask the whole history of work. And so this is what people were doing before but have stopped doing. So this is in addition to all the people that you saw before working in different activities. And you see there's a lot more of these people who used to work in factories and now don't. So this is a classic thing that from rural areas people will go and work in the factory for a few years and come back. So that's a bigger fraction of people have worked in factories than are currently working in factories. And indeed, this is, so if you look at it in total, currently working your own, you've got about, as we've said, about 30% of people are currently doing income-generating activities, but an additional 19% used to. So if you add them together, a lot more women have had some experience doing income-generating activities, but quite a lot of them have stopped. And I think it's interesting to look at the reasons. So they disliked work. We're assuming this is a positive, right? We keep asking this question, is it actually good that they're doing economic activities? Well, a lot of people stopped because they didn't like doing it. Some of them stopped because they wanted to have more time for doing education. Although we still do get, if you look at the marriage-related ones, that is a big issue, that women are stopping because they have to go somewhere else when they get married, or their in-laws don't allow them to work. So marriage is definitely related. Hours worked by number of children, I think this is quite interesting. I was expecting the people working to be going down a lot as you had more children, but that's not particularly what we're seeing. So actually the proportion of people not working goes down with the number of children. What you do see dropping out is working long hours. Like nobody with more children is working long hours.
When we are actually designing the qualitative one, we are not actually thinking of triangulating the quantitative part, rather to understand deeply what's the constraint that adolescent girls face and how they are going to overcome when they are becoming successful. So, our objective was to explore the constraint faced by these young women of southern rural Bangladesh and to identify the strategies they use to mitigate those constraints. And the other thing is, these girls are specially located at the coastal areas of Bangladesh, which is really vulnerable, and they are a little different from the mainland girls, because they every time they have to face not only the constraints in their lives, but also the geographical constraints, all over the year. So for the specific research questions were what type of economic activities they are involved in, and what are their attitudes towards these activities, and what are the constraints that actually prevent them to be engaged with these economic activities, and what are the strategies they adopt to either to avoid or to overcome these constraints and to become successful of getting the economic empowerment. So the method we applied, we started with the storytelling, because we know that if we start with asking the questions directly, then we would get some of the responses which we are not expecting, or they may avoid. Sometimes they are feeling biased with some of the customs or rituals. We find out that the in-depth qualitative interviews is also useful. So while they are telling the stories, we actually ask some of the questions, but those questions are only guiding questions. We didn't have the same questions for all the girls. So it depends on their story which questions we are going to ask and when. So we interviewed married and unmarried girls, you can see, and their age ranges were 16 to 25. And these sample actually came from the big quantitative sample, which actually already been mentioned. But the thing is, we purposefully identified the girls, those who are successful in generating the incomes, being involved. This data has been collected until the end of last year. This year we have been working on analyzing the data and developing some of the cases and paper. Actually, when we did the interview, we had a team of young female researchers who are closely with the age of the respondents, so that while they are doing the report building or asking questions, they might not face some of the constraints we usually have with the researchers and the respondents. So we started with the life stories, and then while they are telling the stories, we usually use some of the questions and getting the responses from them. The tool we used, you already told, that semi-structured guideline. We didn't do any of the note taking, rather we recorded all the session, and for that we have to take the permission from the respondent and their guardians. For unmarried it's the parents, and for married it's the in-laws and husbands. All interviews has been transcribed because it was in local language. We have been transcribed in English, and categorized, and then analyzed into things. I already shared it in our previous session, the areas we worked on. The results, we found that most of them, we already saw in the previous one, that most of them, they are involved in the informal type of economic activities. One is tailoring and then tutoring, and then raising poultry or other livestocks, and making handicrafts. There are some formal economic activities. Some of them are teachers working either in the kindergartens or primary schools. Only one we found in the secondary school. Some of them are government workers, mostly working in the health sector. Some of them are health workers, and we found few girls who are working for the garment factories, and there are some NGO workers at the ground. The thing, when we are talking about the results, we actually didn't ask the direct question that what are the constraints you face or what are the strategies you adopted. But eventually from the stories we identified the constraints and also the strategies they are using. So even though they are very young, but they face a significant hardship in their lives, but some of them are already becoming successful in generating the income. But that was also a struggle. Even though they are earning maybe less than $1 per month, but even they have to face a lot of struggle for that. We found that many of the constraints which they are facing, they are similar, but some of them are using different strategies because their contests are different. So many girls, they are determined to win the people over, like when they are talking about the parents or in-laws or husbands who are actually resisting, then they try to win them, and then others did all the required chores and the work often late into the night. Because we are talking, when we talk about the married girls, they are telling that they want to do something. Maybe they want to continue their education. So they have to make a deal with their in-laws and husbands. First they will work for the household, and then they will either they have to study or they have to go to political school. So this is kind of a deal or negotiation they are doing with their families. Most of them recognized they could not object to constraints directly. They are working with the constraints and pushing against them gently over time. So it is not, they are not going to get any of the arguments with their in-laws because they know that it is not going to work. So rather they are acting that they are doing some negotiation, and then they are proceeding from that point. For example, they are doing tailoring and tutoring, often started making their own clothes and providing tailoring and tutoring to the relatives, and then expanding to once the precedent was set. Like one of the girls started tailoring at home, and after some time now she was thinking of making a tailoring shop in the nearest market. So you can think that the family is already used to see that she is generating income at home, and now family will not be that much resistant with that idea of generating that income, going outside. Societal gender norms often constrain women's business. Most women conducting tailoring felt unable to go to the market to buy needed inputs or sell their outputs. So this is the thing we always thought, and we know that. So in any way they have to keep their in-laws or husbands happy, and women explain importance of understanding their in-laws' mindset. It's always important for them. Some discussed about the need to pamper and show subordination to in-laws as a way to get approval for their objectives. Because if they can't do it, they are not going to be successful to reach their target. Some showed flexibility to their in-laws' wishes, not as a way to compromise their own goals, but as a way to achieve them. Because we always see as a subordination, but it's not actually. This is a kind of strategy they apply. Some girls who marry later start negotiating at the point of getting the marriage proposal, because they are giving some of the options that I can marry you, but you have to give freedom to be educated, or I have to do a job. If you agree, then I can marry you. But that numbers are not very good. And a few young women negotiated with their in-laws about doing household work, continuing to study, and having a job after marriage, which I told earlier. was purposeful because we have to get some of the girls who already been successful. So this sample is not statistically representative. The second limitation was girls actually refused, either girls or their guardians, they refused because they didn't understand the whole point of doing this study. And sometimes we were thrown out of the house, like a beggar or something. We didn't mind for that, but eventually some of them, even they refused, they actually invited us to have lunch with them. So that is the good sign that even though they don't understand, but they are really good, behaving with us. Other one was the interviewing girls at their in-laws' house, which I mentioned before. Sometimes we found that so when the in-laws are present in front of them, because they are not allowing the girls to talk beyond them, so they are always present in front of us. When we are talking with them, answers are different when the in-laws are just in other room or some kind of thing. So we found that these girls are really strategic because they made us to understand that they are still in the in-laws house, and we have to be, the researchers have to be a little strategic to have, to make them responsible or to make response according to our, questions. Other one, the scarcity of evidence. When we started doing this research, we actually looking for some of the tools or case studies or something, but we didn't get any. Most of the things are focusing on agency, not on the individual one. So we are looking for that, and now we can see that there is, so far I can say there is none. So it means that it's not only this research, but we have to focus on this type of research more. And future research will find much more to discuss on the specific factors and optimal environment that best enable girls to use those. And how can we use because we know all the constraints at the individual level, so whenever someone is designing this kind of program, they have to consider this. And the informal activities, we know that these are not that much bringing the inputs or incomes like the formal ones, but we have to consider this because it also matters for the girls who are residing there. And creating such informal economic opportunities will attract more girls to become involved as well as to be empowered in their sphere. So next steps we are also looking for, I also talked about the relationship with husband. Even though we are struggling, but I think it will be a good part of it if we get that part. And the other one is we are also thinking of young women's empowerment indicators, because even though we are talking about women economic empowerment indicators, but for girls we might rethink about it. Having data from the parents and husbands and in-laws, and we are able to know their motivation and support towards this young girls' economic empowerment. That can be explored maybe in the next.
I'll keep my comments really brief. It's a great research and an important policy area where it's been extremely hard to make an impact just by legislative action alone. So what I find interesting is that you're finding such big impacts of that conditional transfer on the age at marriage, 10 percentage point decline. And one thing that I was sort of curious, I didn't see in the slides, but from your midline surveys, you are finding this 10 percentage point decline, but do the impacts vary by SES, or is there any heterogeneity in impacts? Shed more light on the mechanism. And related to that, it would be good to know a bit more context, and so my comment was related to why child marriage happens really be able to understand the theory of change here, I had a few questions slash comments more detailed about intervention would be useful. Yesterday, talking to Shahana, I realized that the mobilization and the intervention ran for a very long time in the village, and it involved initially setting up some community spaces where the girls could interact and work. And so were those community spaces maintained beyond 2011 when your intervention ended? Did the intervention or those spaces sustain themselves even if the NGO executing it exited the community? Did it really exit the community? Did the intervention, because one great thing is that this is a project which started 10 years back, so and it's great that you're doing an inline survey to really see the long-term impacts. Did it manage to change social norms around child marriage? And related to that, since now it's 10 years after the baseline, or your baseline happened in 2007, the girls who were not in your target group, I'm thinking 7-year-old girl, which you didn't target at that point, now she is around 16 or 17. So it would be good to see whether there are any spillover benefits for the younger cohort. Among siblings or social networks, does that happen? And one final question was any aspect of the intervention targeted towards men in the community? Even though in our case that community mobilization didn't work, but talking to Karen the other day, she was saying that there are examples of other areas of the projects where
One question I had that here when you are looking at girls who are now, like you are looking at economic empowerment, are those recipients of only the non-cash conditional transfer, or they also include those who had received empowerment? And so that would be important to know, because it would also be important to know, if possible, to distinguish what happened. It didn't affect their marriage, but did it affect in terms of their other aspects of their lives? Were they able to negotiate? Were they able to negotiate for themselves or for their siblings? So that would be an interesting aspect. Second was about this qualitative. At least from the research. In fact, when I was looking at the, I had not understood why you were presenting only descriptive. Now I understood that. Why are you not probing also the issues of marriage, early marriage, late marriage, and also linking it to intervention? Again, if they also include both who received non-cash transfer and who received that curricula, that education through that curricula, it would be important to again see whether there was a difference or not. So that is one aspect. And I also feel that right now, these, at least in terms of presentation, they appear to be too discrete work. There does not seem to be very well integrated approach in terms of the quantitative results and qualitative study, how it's going to help you understand some of the things that are happening better. So that if that takes care of, and since in this case it's possible much more than any other, because you have already results from the past, and some of those can be probed further to understand the processes, understand why things happen or why things did not happen, and especially this very high impact in terms of reduction.
I think it's working. Thank you. My question is on the incentive that was involved, the cooking oil. My question then comes to like the fact that you're saying it reduced child marriage, and maybe I didn't get well the way you had designed that experiment. Was it incentive to the family, to the household? And if that is the case, it means then the household has a role in like a contributing role, or somehow they play a role in this child marriage. Who decides about the child marriage? And whether or not poverty then, if it speaks to poverty, why would this be an incentive linked to that? Is poverty then the answer, or like the main driver for this child marriage, or any other factors? Because it seems like a major aspect that had really contributed to this reduction of child marriage.
I also want to pick up on a point that Rachel hinted at, the distinction between fertility and labor force participation. We always seem to think that there's negative correlation, but actually now nearly the world over, actually there are quite a lot of places where there's a positive correlation. It's certainly true in OECD countries, there's a positive correlation, but also in places like Indonesia, we did some causal analysis using an instrument where basically we find women who are having excess fertility related to gender preference end up working as a result of being forced to work because they have more children. And maybe that's partly what's going on. And that leads to a larger point about undesirable work. And so that women may be getting into undesirable work out of necessity, and when they can get out of it, they do. And it's hard to interpret whether it's probably bad for their bargaining power, but maybe good for other things. And so I think we have to be very careful about employment per se, but really about quality jobs. That's going to make a big difference.
I had a maybe weird question to ask. I was kind of interested by how your treatment affected the marriage market these girls were facing. Is there any preference for younger girls getting married? Is deferring it leading them to actually get married to worse partners, better partners? It's kind of a weird question, but I guess that it matters at this very local level. And then the other one is, you probably have data about this. What are these girls actually doing when the marriage, is being deferred? As opposed to what they would have done if they had gotten married. That would be a
very much. This is very interesting. Thanks for a great presentation. Like Jyotsna, I'm keen to hear more about how the qualitative and quantitative speak to each other, not only for this project, but more generally. I think it's relevant for many of the projects. In terms of the in-laws, you get this, and it kind of relates to Stephan's question as well, when it becomes acceptable for girls to start working. I think it would be I'd be very interested to hear more about how that works, why in-laws, it's almost like a sticky floors that is created by the in-laws. And I would also encourage you to also look at father and mother-in-laws separately, and including when men are absent, presumably there's a lot of migratories, and men and women tend to play very different and not always the women's empowering role that you would expect in that context. So I'd love to hear more about it. It was a great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Two issues about the Bangladesh study. Being interested in economic empowerment for girls or women, when you say in the income generating activities that you showed, household work being as being an income generating activity, is it income generating activity in the house, or it is household work? So it's listed under income generating activity as an income generating activity, and I would understand household work to be household work, maybe care work or something. And then I think it would be interesting to tell us more about girls living in the labor force. It seemed a big percentage. I don't know whether probably one of the reasons could be the unpaid care tasks back home, or do they live for something else? In the context of my study.
Also probably throughout the lunchtime or in the open space tomorrow.
Yeah.
think this works, yeah. So, in terms of our presentation, since we now, I think it's working. So, since now we have this, we will cut short the presentation. For example, you have already heard about the main features. One of the important things is the last mile. It really decided, and it was a very important thing to decide, that we will work only with the most marginalized. So they really work with scheduled castes, Dalit groups, tribal groups, and also from the poorest sections. So that was located in remote areas. So that was a big challenge. The rest of it, I think you have heard. I'll not go into it. I think one important thing, this theory of change, as you see it, did not exist when they started. They had a theory of change, but not necessarily in a frame that exists now. They had a very clear idea of what they want to do, how they want to do. This is a reconstruction that we have tried to do based on the materials and interviews that we have had. One important thing that is to point out is that they were very convinced that empowerment is not fragmented, and it's linked, and economic empowerment cannot be achieved if you do not also have social empowerment, political empowerment, and individual sphere empowerment in the personal sphere. So that was an important thing to point out. This you have already seen. Important thing here in terms of design of the study is that the quantitative also that happened later for several reasons, we will not go into that, but is of two kinds. But now it has actually turned into something beneficial to us, because here it's RCT, and as you, like most of you do that, so we know the advantages of that. But in Bihar, we are covering 3 districts, one which is almost 20-year-old, one about 10-year-old, and one about 3-year-old. So that's the interesting part of it. And ethnography that we are doing is also actually very, okay. In terms of number, we have maintained the same. And in terms of ethnography, what is again interesting is that here we have continuous. We have one person located in Haveri, the district in Karnataka, who follows the team on a daily basis, observes, writes, shares the notes, and aided by other team members who go there every month. At times twice a month, at times depending on if they have an important meeting, then more frequently. And in Bihar, we have 3 months, 3 months, 3 months period, plus a number of discrete visits to interview other people. So it's also quite deep. One other important thing about research is that we are also doing a document review. Now this is not about literature and other kinds of historical documents which we are reviewing anyway. This is about to understand the quality of their participation in local institutions. So at local level, 2 institutions are very important. One is Gram Panchayat, which is the elected institution for local governance, and the other is School Management Committee, which is again a statutory body with 50% reservation for women. Now, what we are doing, we are collecting these minutes from the villages, both in control and in this we are doing only in Bihar, and in treatment areas, and we are trying to analyze and see whether their participation is more and qualitatively different, the kind of issues they are raising or not raising. So that's an important and interesting aspect. In terms of the status of research, we have baseline data from Karnataka, and we could have presented that. We also have initial ethnography analysis done. We could have also presented that. And we have the Bihar survey over and the processing of data over, but we are in the, still at the stage of doing preliminary analysis. Now, for the sake of time, we decided that we will present the Bihar quantitative because that shows some impact. That's still, I mean, out of all, that's most interesting rather than sharing just. So that was the reason we decided to do that. So we are presenting here only Bihar. Just remember, because that's not always mentioned, that Muzaffarpur is the oldest, Kaimur is the middle level, and Katihar is the new district. Okay, Shri.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry about that. At the first level, what we did was that we looked at the village characteristics, and we, out of all the MS villages, we randomly selected about 50 minor Samakya villages, and then we matched using propensity score method on the two parameters which they consider for the selection of villages. And these are the distributions before and after a match for all the three districts. And we also checked with the t-test to ensure that there is no difference between the treatment and the control comparison villages. And at the second level is the selection of the primary respondents. So since the MS works with the socially marginalized group, which are the scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, other backward caste, and below poverty line population, we ensure that we take only that set of population. So our sample is below the poverty line and belongs to this particular group. And in terms of the matching estimator, we used the education level of the person who can influence the participation of the respondent into self-help groups, and the caste, the type of house, the village level statistic of percentage of SC and ST, and the female literacy. And this is an overlap just to show, after the propensity score, just to show that what's the level of overlap between treatment and control. And these are outcome variables. These are broad areas which we are looking into. There are basically about 6 areas. We started from their own belief and then their awareness of entitlements and laws, and moved into their skill level and decision making and their action, and what are the intergenerational effects that we see because of their participation in the program. Under the attitude, we are looking at the violence against women because it's one of the focus areas of Maya Samakya. They started working heavily in the domestic violence sphere, and then they move on to other things. So those are the variables. These are basic DHS questions which we have picked up from. And entitlements, we are looking into the MG area, which is the right to entitlement to work for about 100 days, and minimum age of entry. So basically this covers their knowledge, their awareness and knowledge about different entitlements and laws and programs that's available and provided by the government itself. Skills and decision making. Skills, we looked at whether they are able to speak and write in Hindi, because that's more the functional literacy which they can interact in terms of engaging in the market with other people, and in terms of whether they've learned any skill, economic saving, ability to go and borrow loans and those kind of things, and also their behavior pattern, like what's the socially acceptable behavior. Decision making, again, those are the set of the questions which you've been looking at from morning. Participation is split into economic and political sphere. So in economic we have employment and savings. We do have depth, but that's not, we're not assessing it right now. We'll have to analyze it a little bit more. Under the political, we made use of a state election which happened just before our survey. Understand the difference between the local level participation and the state level participation. Intergenerational effects, we are looking into the education. Education, we are looking at the current enrollment, not the IS education, but the current enrollment of daughters. And in terms of marriage, we're looking at what's the age of marriage and whether they got married after the legal age. Legal age for boys and girls in India differs. For girls, it's 18, for boys, it's 21. These are a summary of the results. The estimator is the augmented inverse probability weighted estimator, and what significant represents if the Maya Samakya women are higher probability of say take domestic violence. That's the one question on is it acceptable for you to go out without the husband's permission? If they said yes, and if it's significantly higher by 5% rather, that was significant means. Higher impact means in terms of relative positioning, which district has the higher impact. One point to note is Katiyar is the district with the shortest exposure. Kaimur has about 10 years of exposure. Muzaffarpur has about 20 years of exposure. And that SAR is one of the variables at significance at about 10% rather. So what we see in general is kind of a mixed response. In terms of the attitude, we see the district which has the shortest exposure to have the highest impact in comparison to the other two districts, even though the other two districts do have significantly higher impact than the control. Awareness, the medium exposure district has a higher level of impact. But one thing is that when we looked into the descriptive statistics of, so we asked two questions, whether they are aware of a program, and we asked the second follow-up question which was more into details of the program. So if you take the MG Narega, whether they know about the program, and what are the number of days they had to work.
Program here is referring to some government schemes of entitlements of services, public services.
So even though they are more aware, but when it comes to the final details, it always falls into a range. You don't get the exact answer. It's between, it has a lower and upper bound, and that's where most of them are concentrated on. And it's mostly, if you take, say, a pressure 5% thing, it's higher there. And in terms of savings, you see, again, it's the medium level district. Political participation, it's a bit ambiguous because all of them do attend the local level of governance, the Gram Panchayat, but then when it comes to attending or voicing their opinions, they don't do it. And when it came to the state level participation, they were aware of the candidate who was contesting in their constituency and discussed about it, but didn't go on vote because they had to take care of their domestic duties. Intergenerational, we see a higher impact in the oldest exposure district. So it takes a lot of time for the program to diffuse its impact to the next generation. And
yeah, so as Shrikant said, that one is very preliminary analysis. We'll be doing much more. We'll be also, we are looking at data to understand it better. We are looking at descriptive data to understand what kind of analysis is possible. But what it says, what we have done currently, that there is the years of exposure make a difference. We are not drawing conclusive inferences at the moment because we want to understand it better. In the sense that years of exposure also means that women who started, say, in Muzaffarpur are of a different age now. So whether the age makes a difference, we have controlled for age, but still there are many other factors which we want to understand better. But what is coming as that awareness happens early, and it remains. It also perhaps awareness does not necessarily remain there. The fact that it's lower in older districts, it's an effect of how close and how the engagement is, and then it tapers off. That's kind of, again, it's a conjecture rather than a complete inference. But definitely political participation, intra-household relationships in terms of decision making, it takes longer. So that's definitely there. And intergenerational effects are a very important indicator of diffusion of empowerment. I mean, that other studies have shown, and here it comes across. But what we really want to say that in terms of interpretation, and in terms of interpretation of not only the impact, but also the pathways and relationships and how things happen, because that's what helps policymakers in terms of designing strategies, not only in terms of scheme, but also how does that scheme unfold, we are trying to look at document review and ethnography and our results, and using this framework. Now, this framework is also evolving. It's not that it's kind of completely, but right now we feel that we have arrived at a framework which is very helpful, and this is what in fact we would like to hear about. So we are looking at, we will try to separate the information and awareness aspect from action aspect. So the behavior aspect. So that you may be aware that if I go for this livelihood entitlement program, which they are also working on, NREGA, I also have a right to ask for a creche, but you may not be actually asking for it. So differentiating between awareness and action. For example, you are aware that there is an Anganwadi, there is an ICDS center where I can send my child below, say between 3 and 6 for preschool education, whether you really send or him. So we are differentiating between, we will try to do that and look what results we get. And again across the districts, what happens there. And then another thing that we are also trying to do is using both ethnography and ethnography includes not only those 3 districts but also the review of documents and document review that I was talking about. So we are looking at, so for example, Sangha women we have interviewed, but also MS team, because MS team, they comprised of women only, and these women also came from very poor backgrounds and grew with the program. They were trained and they also underwent a lot of changes within themselves. So we are also focusing a lot on them and how they approach the whole issue. And then understanding institutions, MS policy and program. For example, savings and all microfinance related work that you see, half a minute? That you see in the middle, the 10-year district, really showing very high results. Now we are also trying to understand, as we have that information, that initially they didn't, Mahila Samakya in Bihar did not work on that. And then around 2000 the policy came, it changed, and they started focusing on that. So we are also trying to link it with program focus and larger policy focus. What are the entitlement programs that came at what stage, whether the program included it or not. So we will do the larger environment, enabling environment, disabling environment analysis also in terms of policies, in terms of political environment, maybe even movements, and try to again interpret the results from quantitative using all this and the pathways that lead to change or do not lead to change.
Thank you for that, both of you. I must say I'm really excited by this research. Especially because I think Mahila Samakya has some really valuable lessons to offer on understanding the processes of women's empowerment. And I'm hoping, from what you're saying, I'm sure you're going to bring out those processes in some fine detail. For me, why it's interesting to study Mahila Samakya is one, for scale, because it is one of the largest programs, targeting women. Many others in scale are IDRC and CERP, in terms of, actually mobilizing women. So I think there are possibilities of replicating. That is, if they don't shut it down first, as we know they're in the process of doing. Actually, I wanted to bring attention back to some good old-fashioned feminist mobilizations. I think that is at the heart of women's empowerment. So I really like that is at the heart of that's what the program is about. So getting back to, we've got to think about so many types of interventions, but collectivization as being at the heart of processes of women's empowerment for me is really exciting. And understanding that process, I think, will bring some real understanding how empowerment occurs. In terms of methodology, I really, again, appreciate your methodology. I like the fact that it's cross-sectional as well as I think that is really interesting because you're not only understanding, and your cross-sectional is looking at oral history, so you've got that long view, and you're looking at processes for individual women through the 2-year process in Karnataka, right? So I think there's so many things in terms of short-term, mid-term, long-term that you're going to be able to come up with, as you said. I think that is really valuable. I do have some questions about your methodology, because I mean, I'm just thinking about the vastness of the material you're going to gather. I mean, you already have 3,000 surveys, and then you're also doing oral histories. I don't even know numbers. I mean, oral histories, case studies, document review. I mean, for me, mind boggles. Yeah, no, so I mean, I want to understand how you're going to grapple with this. How many oral histories are you doing? How many interviews are you doing? How many, you know? Then I had some more specific questions. I mean, maybe some of this you answered already in the last bit of your presentation. Decision making, employment in Muzaffarnagar, very little impact. And that is your 20-year study, right? That for me was quite concerning. So, of course, I mean, we're thinking about women's empowerment, so we're thinking, okay, this is our way, but if, as you said, if there are no enabling environment, there are no, if there's no employment available, no opportunity. So, in a sense, I like the fact that you're also looking outward, but that is one of the questions I would have. Why is Muzaffarnagar coming out with these kinds of results? Worrying. In terms of your outcome variables, you take savings and employment together. I don't know if you're disaggregating them or it is disaggregated. Okay, so that was one of my, because in the slides what I saw was that, you know, it's okay, no, then that's good because obviously you want to have them disaggregated, right? And my last comment really is, and this I will quote Vimla Ramchandran, who is the first director of Mahila Samakya. She talks about the dangers of innovations becoming norms and then becoming straitjackets. So I mean, so if you think about, you know, how do you capture the processes, transformative processes in women's lives, as well as the processes through which ossification of some of these concepts. So, you know, you're talking about ways in which all these non-negotiables. What do they mean when you keep churning it out and churning it out? Decision making. I mean, all of these things ossify and lose value, and be able to, you know, tell us what counts as empowerment, what feels like an ossifying concept.
Wonderful to go after Shraddha because she has dealt with a lot of points that I'd like to make. So I'll just focus on two things. Okay? One is technical, which is, I think you're doing so much work that everybody hesitates to give you more work to do. But what would be useful in perhaps the next evaluation is to take non-Mahila Samakya participants, because in the Mahila Samakya villages. Because what Seva evaluations have done is, they've shown that presence of the program has an impact on both participants and non-participants. The second part is where I want to take off where Shraddha ended, which is, let's remember that this is a government-owned program, okay? And yet it's a civil society program. Okay? There are essentially, India has had only two programs, I think, in my opinion, that have been good civil society programs and yet were state-owned programs. One was Lok Jumbish, and the other is Mahila Samakya. Lok Jumbish fell apart totally because at some point the state tried to expand it too fast. It couldn't keep up with the state level regulations and expansions and so on. I hate to see that happen to Mahila Samakya. So in some sense, I think what we should be doing is thinking about what does it mean when state actually owns programs which are civil society programs. And so in some sense, if you can come up with some lessons on processes, okay, which processes work and which don't, you know, this district classification and comparisons. So how about adding, I know you're doing some work with some yoginis, how about also looking at their recruitment, who supervises them, and doing exactly, because that's where a bigger contribution will come out than actual evaluation of a program, because essentially it's the quality of the program that matters Otherwise, you evaluate and you say that, oh, this program didn't work, but maybe it was never implemented well.
For the discussants, thank you, but may I please request